Welcome to the Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. We're here to share stories of real river accidents and rescues and find expert advice on how to solve the problems you might encounter in the Whitewater River environment. I'm your host, Jack Diddy, an emergency medicine physician, whitewater paddler, and wilderness medicine educator. Together, I hope we can celebrate successful rescues and learn from our mistakes in a supportive environment. If you have a story to share of a non-fatal accident or rescue, send me an email at thesafetybreak@gmail.com or contact me on our Facebook page, The Safety Break. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media. I hope you learned something valuable in the show. In our last episode, we heard a story of an injury on Big Sandy Creek in northern West Virginia. It's a magnificent place. In the River Gypsy's Guide to North American Whitewater, Leland and Andrea Davis call it one of the finest stretches of whitewater on the continent, which is pretty high praise considering the depth of their experience and travels. One of the paddlers that calls this watershed his home is Charlie Walbridge. He has put in some major efforts to protect it. In 2023, he and Dave Huff spearheaded the purchase and conservation of a huge portion of the land within the Big Sandy Gorge, with crowdfunding from the local paddling community. It was a great win for river conservation in the region. But Charlie's contributions to the whitewater world obviously go much beyond this. It's hard to imagine that any one person has made more of an impact on the development and promotion of whitewater river safety. When he first started paddling in the late 1960s, helmets were uncommon, throw ropes were unheard of, and there was no widespread established curriculum for river rescue training. The only real mention of river safety in the first river guidebook from that time, written by Randy Carter in 1967, basically says that life jackets are optional, at least until you become familiar with the river, and then you can just go without. In 1972, two things pushed whitewater paddling into the mainstream consciousness: Jamie McEwen's bronze medal C1 slalom performance in the Munich Olympics, and the release of the movie Deliverance. Somewhat ironically, with its graphic depictions of a severe injury and a bizarre riverside assault, this movie attracted throngs of people into the sport. And of course, with this new popularity, drownings and injuries soon followed. Around that same time, Charlie was involved in whitewater slalom racing, and a fatal accident at one of the races in Unadilla, New York, really kickstarted his interest in river rescue and safety. This led to a lifetime of contributions to the whitewater community. Along the way, he created innovations in throw rope design, the high float PFD, and river rescue training standards. He is the author of the Whitewater Rescue Manual, and most recently a book called Whitewater Rescues, which features stories of great saves and successful rescues. He has been a long-standing volunteer with American Whitewater, serving as the chair of the safety committee and the steward of the accident database. One of the things I've always respected about Charlie is his perspective on the idea of calculated risk. It would be easy for many people in an authority figure role to just take the position of discouraging high-risk paddling pursuits. But I've never really heard that from him. He has always been a proponent of educating the uninformed and helping the true paddling enthusiasts to gain the skills and tools they need to make these risk calculations for themselves as they push their limits. I was curious to hear about all these chapters of his career, but mostly I wanted to bring him on here to express our gratitude for all that he has done for our sport. This interview was recorded last year, just after the successful Big Sandy land acquisition and shortly before the release of his new book. It's taken me much too long to get it edited and published, but I thought it was appropriate to finally release it with the recent episode about Big Sandy Creek and with the upcoming Cheat River Festival this weekend. This festival is always the first weekend in May in Albright, West Virginia. It's a really cool event with local live music and tons of great paddling nearby this time of year. It also raises money for the host organization, Friends of the Cheat. If you've ever paddled in that area, either on the Cheat River or the Big Sandy, chances are you've benefited from the work of this great group of people. If you have any extra money to spare that you want to directly impact some really cool rivers, this is a good place to send it. I'll have a link to it on our Facebook site. So here's Charlie Walbridge with his story. We start by going back about 50 years to the icebreaker slalom race in Unadilla, New York, and the event that sparked his initial interest in whitewater safety.
Well, the first article I wrote for American Whitewater was 1975. Actually, it was in the 1976 journal. And I was at a slalom race where a guy was killed in a Class 2 slalom race. It actually happened right in front of me. I was the next racer down. And I come out of an eddy and look downstream, and you could just tell there was something going wrong. People, when there's something wrong, they move differently on shore. They're very jerky. And, a lot of running around in circles or back and forth. And so I knew there was trouble, and I ran up, and I didn't know what to do. There was this guy pinned underwater. And eventually the water was turned off at the dam, and the dam was right upstream of the slalom course. So once that happened, they got him out pretty quickly, but that took much too long for a recovery. And afterwards, I was talking to O.K. Goodwin, who was the safety chair of American Whitewater at the time, and I can't remember the fellow's name who was the American Canoe Association safety chair. He was from the Midwest. Both of them were saying, oh, this is a freak accident. And I wasn't satisfied, so I started talking to as many people as I could. And what particularly had me concerned was there were a number of people on site who were guides from the yacht, and they were the best rescuers I knew at the time, and they couldn't do anything. And after talking to people, I wrote an accident report, which went to a number of Canoe Club newsletters before it went to American Whitewater, and several people said, yeah, we had something similar happen on the Nantahala. We had something similar happen on the Obed. And so when it finally got into the journal, it was really the first description of foot entrapment. Still didn't know what to do, but back in those days, the typical warning was don't stand up; it could sprain your ankle. And this guy was standing up. It was shallow water, and he was trying to pull his boat ashore, and he went over a ledge, and his foot went under a rock. And I think it's probably one of the key things behind the current warning to keep your feet up. It's, there are many things about safety that are counterintuitive, and that's one of them, because standing up is something you want to do. I have to think about it. I have to fight myself. Now, when I'm teaching rescue, it's like you can stand up if you're in water that is less than knee deep, or if you're in a place where there's no current, like an eddy. But, that comes later. You can get away with standing up in current. It's just really risky.
So once you had the knowledge of that type of mechanism of injury, how did you go about developing the next step of rescue techniques for that type of entrapment?
Well, the credit for that has to go to Slim Ray and to Glenn Carlson. There weren't really river rescue courses until 1980. I mean, guides did guide training, and I did guide training when I guided on the Cheat. But basically, a lot of guide training was paddling along with the boys so that they knew you weren't a swimmer, and maybe swimming out to a raft. The Cheat guys weren't even really into throw ropes back then, and most people didn't carry them. I sold probably the first rescue bag, 1977. I had gotten a diagram of it from a fellow named Ray Miller, who was a Red Cross water safety expert. And I was part of a group from American Canoe Association, helping them with their canoe and kayak training programs. But in any case, I had met Ray Miller, who was the Red Cross guy, and he showed me this drawing, which actually was published in American Whitewater about that time, of a throw bag, which he had gotten from U.S. Navy archives because they were apparently used on lifeboats. And I got his drawing, and I said, this is probably a gimmick, because I was very influenced by the yak and cheat guides, and they were pretty down-to-earth, basic people, no fancy stuff. Some of them didn't even wear shoes, but they were capable. I mean, something went wrong, they'd be out of their boat, they'd swim over there, they'd get done what needed to be done. And I was always really impressed by those guys. And so I made up a throw bag using a stuffed bag and a piece of foam and some rope, took it out to my front porch and threw it and said, holy smokes. Because before you'd carry a length of rope in your boat, and if you wanted to use it, you would have to untie it, you'd have to throw it out to get the kinks out, and, that takes a while. The throw bag was ready to go instantly. And that was a big deal.
What other things have you seen in your career that you'd consider to be game-changing developments like that?
Well, the big game changer, of course, was, in terms of rescue, was Slim and Les Bechtel, who in 1979 in the summer, they lost one of their guides in Jawbone Rapid on Section 4. He was shoved under an undercut, and they couldn't help him. And it was late in the season, so all the people were very experienced. They couldn't help him. And so Les and Slim got together that winter and put together a river rescue course. And, of course, Slim eventually wrote the book River Rescue, which really set out a lot of the things. And so they had that going on, and I had heard about it, but, again, I'm one of these yacht guides, and it's like, how much training do you really need? And I went down and took a class from him, and, they were doing Tyrolean traverses above Nantahala Falls. They were doing Telfer lowers of rafts. And I said, this is kind of interesting, but this isn't practical. But what Slim did and Les did was they got people thinking, hey, it's not enough to wait until something happens and stand on the shore and scratch your head and figure out what to do. We have to develop some techniques that we can apply immediately. And they did the first stabilization line and snag line, but the guy who really refined it was Glenn Carlson. Glenn was a rescue instructor, and he ran a day-long course that was essentially doing this snag line over and over again. And I think now, when it's taught, it's really pretty practical. It's something you and your buddies could conceivably do, and that's the important thing. There are a lot of rather complicated rescue skills out there, but you got to think, what are you going to use when you're on a river with a bunch of friends, some of whom may not have had a course?
And did those early courses become the model for the Swiftwater Rescue Course curriculum that we see today?
Well, the way that worked was I lived in Philadelphia at the time, and we would go out to the Delaware, and we would play at Lambertville Rapid, and late in the summer it would be hot and it would be low water, so I started swimming around. And I found that I gained a lot from swimming in the rapid. And this is not difficult. It's probably class 2, but it's a wide river. And so I did a one-day class, which I called Whitewater Self-Defense, which was swimming, wading, throw bags. And a lot of it was to get people comfortable in the water. It was controversial. I mean, there were people who, back then who were very nervous about swimming. I mean, you could just tell when they were in the water, they were scared. And I had more than one guy come over and yell at me for being unsafe. And I go, Tom, it's me. Yeah, but you're gonna kill somebody. And I went out to California. I was invited to an outdoor program symposium, and they had Rescue 3 there, and I took a half-day course with Rescue 3, and they were swimming and wading, and I said, cool, there's some other people who do this. And they of course, a lot of their instructors were ex-Navy SEALs, and they could totally outswim you. But the idea that you put people in the water was something that made sense to me. And at some point, I was asked to develop a program for American Canoe Association, and I worked with Wayne Sunmacher, who had been in one of my courses. And Wayne was great because he had a lot more advanced rope skills than I did. But I was much more comfortable working in the water. And so we taught each other a lot. We put a program together, which was eventually accepted. And, now there are hundreds of instructors teaching thousands of courses, and it's really gone way beyond what I started with.
So the place most of us see your name these days is with the American Whitewater Accident Database. Can you tell us a little bit about that and about your role with American Whitewater?
Well, initially when I was writing accident reports, there just weren't that many of them. I think I did that one, up for Unadilla. And because of that, I got a call from some friends of Bob Taylor. Bob was probably at the time the best kayaker in West Virginia, and he was killed on the left side of Tumblehome on the Gauley. And I wrote that up. And, that's what got me asked to be American Canoe Association safety chair. And at that time, AW was really struggling. They were an all-volunteer organization. And so it wasn't until Pete Skinner just decided that he wasn't going to let the thing die. He was in Chicago, and he got the box with all of AW's stuff. And he flew out to California and asked Yvonne Chenard for $10,000 to jumpstart the organization, which we did get, and got the journal going again. But I was working mostly with the ACA because they were a much stronger organization. We were doing some liaison work with the Coast Guard and with state boating agencies, which I was really excited about because, when you lose a first responder, that's the worst publicity the sport can possibly get. Because these are young volunteers who have ties to the community, and it was happening way too often, violating really basic safety rules. And so I worked with the state of Pennsylvania, which was easy because it was just in Harrisburg, which was 2 hours down the road, and they had ties with the state of Ohio. And I had taught a few times to rescue squads, and I remember walking into a room. It was the Jim Thorpe Rescue Squad on the Lehigh River. I walked into a room, and there were about 20, 30 guys all sitting back in their chairs with their arms folded and a scowl. They were a tough audience, and the only paddlers they ever met were the ones that were pulling out of the river, so they weren't meeting the people who knew what they were doing. But fortunately, I had Jim Segerstrom's video of bloopers, essentially things which were caught on the news of people rescue squads doing horrible things. And the way I put it up is, hey, I'm sure you guys know all about low-head dams, but take a look at this. This is something that happened in California during a training session. Now watch how they get sucked in. And I went through these things. And when the lights came back on again, everyone was whispering to each other. And, that's really what I wanted to do, to get them thinking. And because I wasn't going to teach them to be rescuers in a day, but what I could do is get them interested in it. And we did several symposiums, one in Richmond, one in Washington, D.C., one in Ohiopyle, which was designed to bring first responders and paddlers together. And essentially, we showed them what we had, and they showed us what they had, because they have a lot in terms of organization and resources. And it was interesting because in Richmond, we were sort of boycotted by the Richmond Bureau of Fire. but they sent two guys who would not give their affiliation. But everyone told me, oh, those are Richmond firefighters. But they would not admit they were Richmond firefighters. And then after the symposium was over, we heard that about a month later, they got Rescue 3 in there and they trained all their people. That was what we wanted to do. We wanted to let people know what's out there. And of course, now there are a lot of people, including Rescue 3, who do specific training that's aimed at firefighters and first responders. And they do a much better job, because I'm always going to have a hurdle going in there. The only guy who I saw who could maintain those guys' concentration and attention was Les Bechtel. There's something about Bechtel that, man, when he talked, you could just tell that they were listening.
I think it's interesting and kind of important to note that promoting a culture of river safety secondarily impacts river access. And I think a lot of what you're talking about highlights that.
Absolutely. And that's why I was interested in it. Because the accident reporting part is you just want people to talk about what happened. And people have always talked about it. You know, you get around the fire or at a bar somewhere, but I wanted to have it broader and with more people talking about more things. And some people are talkers. There are people who are not. And there are people, when something happens, they don't want to talk. I've had trouble usually once or twice a year getting information. I have to go with like secondary sources. We want to talk about it so that we can learn from it, so we can figure things out. Like in the 80s, there was a rash of what I would call big water drownings, flush drownings, people coming out of their boat and dying despite the fact they wore a life jacket. Then in late 80s, early 90s, there were a whole bunch of squirt boating accidents. And I was just sort of saying, I'm not sure that this boat is what you want to be in all places. And what finally got the message across was Whitney Shields, who is a superb kayaker, son of a contemporary of mine. One of the early Great Falls runners, was vertically pinned and drowned on the lower meadow in a squirt boat. And there had been a lot of accidents, but that's the one that got everybody's attention because he was so mainstream. And now you see squirt boats used for what they're good for, which is playing, especially on big rivers with clean runouts. And that right around the year 2000, there were a bunch of drownings involving people on the U.S. whitewater team. And, it was because the people, it was all new school. And they were certainly doing things that we never dreamed of, but they cut some corners. And that's fixed now. The people are managing things remarkably well. I was afraid when the big waterfall running started that we were going to have a rash of those, but we haven't. And Clay Wright sort of took me aside because I'm not a waterfall runner. I think the highest ledge I've run is about 10, 12 feet. Clay took me aside and just talked to me about how, what people were doing, what they were looking for, how they were running these things. And it made sense. And the big thing is that we haven't had a huge number of accidents that would make me go out and say, look, this is really stupid. Because it's not. People clearly know what they're doing with this.
Along those same lines, in the past year or so, I've noticed multiple reports of some great rescues and resuscitations. And it makes me think that people are getting the message and have really stepped up to get good training.
When I get a report of a rescue involving paddlers in the community, it's not unusual that these folks have had rescue training. These folks have had CPR training. And that just gave them a tremendous advantage. Now, of course, there's some people, who have so much experience. I don't think Roger Zabel or Johnny Regan has ever taken a rescue course, but I can't think of anybody I'd rather have coming after me if I was in trouble on the river than those two. they're the exception. Most of us benefit from thinking about it and practicing some basic stuff.
So back to the accident database, what type of input are you looking for from the paddling community? Are you mostly looking for reports from fatal accidents, or do you find value in the successful rescues as well?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Near misses are especially useful. And, I've done fatal accident reports, and, they're interesting, but it's kind of a bummer. The near miss reports are really uplifting and really positive. The database was actually the work of Tim Kelly. I was AW safety chair for a while, and then Lee Belknap was, and then Tim was, and he promoted this idea. And it's sort of typical me. I wasn't so sure of it, but I sounded like something I like to help with, and it's been incredibly helpful. I get most of my reports either by email or Facebook Messenger, and they're not elaborate. It's just like a paragraph, but that's certainly good enough. Sometimes people want to do a more extended write-up, and that's wonderful, but it doesn't happen that often. And so typically I take these reports and I put them in the database. But there are two things that are really important. One is the people who share the stories with me. And it is their story. I want to tell their story. And, they don't have to worry about me, passing judgment or making snide remarks. I just want to tell the story because in our community, we know what the deal is. We read the story. We can take a lesson from it. And the other thing is that American Whitewater and American Canoe Association before that has been really important because, if I went to, Ohio Powell State Park, which I did to try and work out some sort of kinks in the falls running rules. If I just went there as myself, they this is this big older guy. I wonder what his deal is. But when I say I'm a board member of American Whitewater and I maintain the accident database, it gives me a certain credibility, and that's really important. And it's been important for people not just doing safety stuff, but doing access and conservation. It empowers members who are willing to put in the volunteer time. And so the organization has been tremendously important in my life and what I do.
Well, I think we've all benefited from having you in that role for so many years. As you look at the big picture, what's your overall assessment of the culture of safety in our sport now?
I think the culture is what exists, that people in our community are very aware of safety. And certainly you get all kinds of people, from people who are safety conscious and conservative to the point of inaction, to people who ignore things and who get banged up. But it's generally a pretty safety conscious community. If you tried to put on the ACOE without a life jacket or a helmet, you'd be talked to. The real challenge is to reach out from our community into people who are just getting started. Certainly one of the things that AW does a lot is they work with river managers and to a lesser extent with boating law administrators and to try and figure out ways to get the message across, because that's the real challenge. With experienced paddlers, mistakes will get made, and sometimes there are things that happen that you really can't put your finger on what went wrong. A hidden sieve or a log. It's like mountaineering and objective danger. I've got several instances in the database of trees falling on passing canoeists. And, you can't protect yourself from that sort of thing, from objective danger. It's just, there's a lot of objective danger in life, but there are a lot of things you can do to minimize risk. And the paddling community is pretty good at it, but the people outside the community are often pretty clueless, and I was pretty clueless when I started. I didn't know rivers rose and fall. I thought you saw a river, that's what you had.
Yeah, I think a lot of us started out that way. I know I learned almost everything in the first few years with just totally ignorant blunders and crashes and some powerful lessons, I guess. So I want to switch gears here and ask you about a place that is pretty special to both of us, the Big Sandy Creek Gorge. About 25 years ago, my friend Willie Witt and I showed up there and luckily happened to run into you at Rockville at the put-in, and you showed us our first run down that creek. It quickly became one of my favorite places to paddle and was my backyard run for a long time. So what is it about that creek that is so special, and what was this land purchase all about?
I often tell people it's nature's most perfect river for an advanced paddler. The rapids are interesting, but not really dangerous. But there are a couple of hard ones, which if you're an upper level paddler, you can run Big Splat. You can run First Island. And of course, Wonder Falls is wonderful if you like to run waterfalls, and so that it's something that really appeals to skilled paddlers, but it doesn't drive them up against the wall. It's not like Decker's Creek, say, and it's really beautiful. I've been interested in that area for quite some time. And probably 10 years ago, a group of us made an unsuccessful effort for a piece of it from Allegheny Wood Products, and they were not easy to deal with. Then the Cheat Canyon got protected, but Allegheny Wood Products held on to their Big Sandy land and sold it to a developer. And the developer is in the process of putting lots on the upper Big Sandy. And, that's, disappointing. I really wish that the state had been successful in their first attempt where they could have bought everything. But without getting into a long story, that was what we were faced with. And we had heard that the developer might be interested from Dave Huff, who is a retired outfitter who owns property near the development. He developed a friendship with one of the people and thought they might be interested in selling some of the property. And we brought the conservation fund in, and the conservation fund tried but was unable to get both sides of the river. And so what they had asked me to do was to see how much I could fundraise, and it's a place that is really special, and if you have some cash sitting around, it's a good place to put it. And so when the conservation fund dropped back, because part of the piece was very developable, unfortunately, we said, well, let's go for the other side. And we had enough money to do it. Now, first we had to figure out, okay, where are people going to give money? Well, they're going to give money to AW. And that's a 501c3, that's tax deductible, and that's something that all of us who give money like to have. Then the next thing was who is going to hold the land. And I had worked on the Jenkinsburg access in the previous years and gotten to know the people at the West Virginia Land Trust. And a land trust is designed to hold land indefinitely. And it means that they have to really check the land out before they buy it. And it also means that we have to raise an endowment for them so that they will be able to do the routine work, everything from the surveys that are needed before it starts, to making sure that there aren't encroachments, and that takes a little while. And so AW is really serving as a bridge, and I'm hoping that I can organize for a few more things before the dust settles. But I'm very, grateful to the 40-plus people who pledged the money, because they're the ones who made it happen. They're the ones that told Dave and me, hey, we can go to these people and try to do something. And it worked.
Well, that was really great to see so many people coming forward to help fund that effort and to make it a successful purchase. What else do you see happening with that land?
I think the Allegheny Trail will eventually be relocated there. They have to wait until we do the survey on some of the lower parcels, which haven't been surveyed since the 1920s. So it's a good step towards protecting this river, which is my favorite river.
I think it may be my favorite river as well. Well, Charlie, I think we've all benefited from your work with this recent victory along the Big Sandy, and really for all of your work over the years with the promotion of river safety and river conservation. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, and thank you for a whole career of volunteerism within the sport.
Well, thanks so much, Jack. It's great talking to you, and miss you up in West Virginia.
Well, hopefully I'll run into you again at Rockville, and we'll paddle the Big Sandy again sometime soon. Thanks again, everyone, for listening today to The Safety Break. As this episode is released, the Cheat River Festival is just a few days away. I hope you get a chance to get out there and support Friends of the Cheat and paddle some of the fantastic rivers of the region. Also, be sure to check out Charlie's recent book, Whitewater Rescues. I'll post a link for that. As usual, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the river. Thank you for listening to The Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button and click follow on our Facebook page so we know that you're out there. I'm also looking for more stories. If you know of an interesting non-fatal river accident or rescue, send me a few details by email, safetybreak@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-threatening, just something that we all might be able to learn from. I'll see if we can turn it into an episode. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the river.